Okay, I think we're just about ready. Thank you for your patience, everyone, and thank you for coming. My name is, hi, how are you? No worries. There is a sign-in sheet if you don't mind, signing in, appreciate it. And there's also an agenda. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and thank you for coming. My name is Rima Shamia. I'm a transportation planner with the Capital Region Transportation Council. Before we get started, I'd like to just say welcome and thank you for coming. If you are joining us remotely, if you could please type your name and your title if you have one, and if you're with an organization or municipality, if you can go ahead and let us know that as well. Type that in the chat. We would really appreciate it because we like to keep track of who is joining us today. And if we could just quickly go around the room to start and just introduce ourselves, so we know who is with us, and then we could go down the list of who's with us remotely. That would be great. And do you want to start?
Sure. I'm Sandy Mislitz. I'm the Executive Director of the Capital Region Transportation Council, and welcome everyone.
My name is Alex Ward. I am a neighborhood specialist with the City of Albany.
Hi, I'm Jen Vigiani. I'm with the Town of Clifton Park.
I'm Shalisha Salmon Gordon, Program Director for Chronic Disease Prevention with the Albany County Department of Health.
Hello, I'm April Land with the Capital Area Urban League.
Linda Bonner-Hunter from Rochester County Planning.
Carrie Ward with the Transportation Council. Thank you. And online, let's see. Ed, do you want to start?
Hi, Ed Brennan, Albany Bicycle Coalition.
Emily Pertel. Is Emily there? Maybe she doesn't have audio. Ethan? Warren?
Ethan Warren, Capital District Transportation Authority.
Thanks.
Eva Bass, A Village Inc. and Bridge the Gap Resource and Outreach.
Hi, Ava. Nice to see you. Glad you could join us. Jackie Gonzalez.
Jackie Gonzalez, Capital Streets and Walkable Albany.
Hi, Jackie. Leonard Klaus.
Len Claus, Rensselaer County Department of Health Deputy Director.
Thank you. Mark Castiglione.
Mark Castiglione, Executive Director of the Capital District Regional Planning Commission. I regret not being there in person, but the Albany School District randomly decided to give Tuesday as a day off for the kids.
I feel you. Let's see, we have Sarah Kemp.
Sarah Camp, City of Albany Department of Neighborhood Services Director.
Thank you. Let's see. Susan, is it Lorillard?
Hi, good afternoon. Susan Larilliard. I'm Albany County Legislator for the 22nd Ledge District, which covers the Latham, New York area.
Thank you for coming today. Trent Griffin. And I know you typed your name and affiliation in the chat, so I don't know if you have audio already, or Trent, if you want to say hi. Introduce yourself. Okay, well, maybe we'll hear from you later. Okay. He says his internet is choppy. No worries. Okay, so moving on, just some guidelines. If you aren't speaking and you're online, please mute your microphone so we don't pick up any background noise. You can just choose your phone, use your phone function. You can have your phone, your camera on or off if you want, it's up to you. If you have any comments or questions, you can put them in the Zoom chat function, or you can raise your hand if you have a question during the presentations. We are recording and live streaming all of our advisory committee meetings, including this one. And if you have a public comment that you would like to make at the end of this agenda, you can use the chat function or the raise hand function for that. So our agenda today, we just did the welcome and introductions. Our executive director, Sandy, is going to cover information about the Capital Region Transportation Council and our advisory committee operating policies. Then I'm going to go into the information about the purview, or what we see as the purview of the Equity Advisory Committee, since this is sort of the relaunch, the kickoff of this particular advisory committee, what we are looking at as priorities for this fiscal year. And we'd like to hear from all of you as far as what your interests are in terms of your involvement with this committee. And then we're going to kick it back over to Sandy to hear about the in-motion plan, the update for our Metropolitan Transportation Plan. And then Carrie's going to talk about the Regional Vision Zero Safety Action Plan. And then we are going to just check in and see what is the best date and time for our future meetings. And then cover any public comments that we might have. So first up, about the Transportation Council.
Thanks, Rima, and again, welcome everyone to the reboot of this Equity Advisory Committee. For those of you who maybe have been around for a while and know who we are and what we do here, please forgive me that you're going to get another overview of who we are and what we do. But in order to start off this group, many of you may not know who we are and what we do. So I'm just going to give a brief overview of what this organization does. And to start with, we're what's called a metropolitan planning organization. So under federal law, every populated area with 50,000 or more people have what's called an MPO. These are designated by the governors of the states. And we've existed, most of them were probably designated in the 1960s, but with each 10-year census, new ones get added, some get taken away because the population has actually shrunk. So there's a little bit of a change at the point of the census. Larger metropolitan areas like ours, those with 200,000 or more people are also designated what's called a transportation management area. That's just a fancy term for simply saying you have more requirements under federal law. That's really all that refers to. But the purpose of an MPO is to lead this collaborative, cooperative, and comprehensive regional transportation planning process. Next slide. So what does that entail? The Metropolitan Transportation Planning process has, under federal law, 10 planning factors. We talk about supporting the economy of a region, the safety of the transportation system, the security of the transportation system, making sure we use our funding to support access and mobility options, quality of life, making connections and integrating the system, making sure things run efficiently, and preserve what we have. We want to make sure the system is resilient and reliable, and thinking about enhancing travel and tourism. The federal government, as this bullet says, does not hold approval authority for decisions made locally. And that's really one of the key purposes of the MPO, is to assign the federal transportation dollars that come to the region to projects and programs and plans that benefit our region in our local context, right? So it's not the federal government coming in and saying, we know best, do this. It's using this process to develop what those plans and policies are that can then lead to the implementation of projects through our federal funding that's available to us. Next slide. So NPOs are very unique creatures of government. They're governed by a policy board. I'll get into more details in a minute on the policy board, but the policy board is our decision-making body. Underneath that, we have what is called a planning committee. The planning committee is it's basically a technical advisory committee, we'll put it that way. The policy board is our elected officials and our member agencies. The planning committee is usually their staff counterpart, so think Mayor Sheehan would be representing the city of Albany. And maybe a staff member from the planning department or their engineering department would be on the planning committee, so that's sort of that structure. Underneath that are advisory committees like this one. We're gonna get into depth here on how this advisory committee is going to operate and the topics you folks will be involved with. And then our staff works for everybody, right? So we kind of bubble up throughout the whole process, and you see the public can be engaged in any one of these areas all throughout our process. We do have a few task forces and working groups that work on specific things that are not necessarily open to the public, but the information they generate ultimately gets into the public discourse because of the existence of these other committees in this structure. And we have new operating policies, which we'll share in a little bit. So a little more about our policy board. Our members currently include, first of all, our geographic area that we cover here at this MPO is the counties of Albany, Rensselaer, Schenectady, and Saratoga, with the exception of the town of Moreau / village of South Glens Falls up in northern Saratoga County. That's actually up in a neighboring MPO. But within our planning area, we have members from the 8 cities, the 4 counties, so each county has actually 2 voting representatives on our policy board. There are 2 rotating town and village representatives, so every year we identify a town or village supervisor and or mayor to sit on the policy board, and that rotates by county and by community size. And then by virtue of its size as a larger community, the town of Colony has a permanent seat as a member agency. So those are the municipal members. In addition to those municipal members, we have regional and state planning organizations or agencies, including CDTA, the State DOT, Capital District Regional Planning Commission, the Thruway Authority, the Albany International Airport or the Airport Authority, and then the Port of Albany. So all of these folks meet quarterly to serve that role of our decision-making body here at the MPO. Next slide. We work under a consensus voting process, which simply reiterates our desire to have a cooperative and comprehensive and collaborative planning process here. Everything's open to the public, and we try to be as inclusive as we can be, which is one of the roles this group will hopefully play. The policy board sets the big picture framework for how we operate here in terms of planning and assigning money to capital projects. I'm going to throw some terms at you. So if at any time terms or acronyms are unknown to you, feel free to stop me and I'll try to explain some of the terminology. One of the things that the policy board does, again, is they make these planning and programming decisions. They have our direct authority, or our direct authority for everything we do here. They meet quarterly and they delegate some authority to our planning committee. Next slide. So I just want to define what we mean when we talk about planning versus programming. Programming is a federal term that you may or may not be familiar with. Planning is simply identifying a strategy for meeting a transportation need or achieving some kind of a desired outcome, right? So we develop a lot of these planning documents. You know, all levels of government have different forms of plans. We have a few core planning documents that we'll review in a minute. But when you hear the term programming, so an example of that might be what's called the Transportation Improvement Program. That document and that term really is referring to scheduling work and assigning money to do things, to actually implement things. So programming money can be done on a capital program side. It can also be done on the planning side. That's just the action, the term we use to assign the federal funds to our work. So it might be a new terminology for some of you. But you might hear these terms over the time you're involved with us here. Next slide. So as I mentioned, our planning committee is really that technical advisory committee, and to be honest, a lot of the decision-making and policy direction that's given to the policy board is really formulated at the planning committee level. That's where the hard work gets done. It's the simplest way to put it. They make recommendations to the policy board for action. The planning committee meets 8 times, even more than that really per year. Sometimes we're meeting up to 12 times a year, depending on the year. It has a slightly different representation in the policy board. All of the member agencies I described earlier have seats on the planning committee, but the number of votes change. So for the 4 counties, for example, there's only 1 voting member per county. There's only 1 rotating town and village member. But the 8 cities in the town of Colony, plus these other agencies, still have a vote at the table. So it's slightly different, but like I said, this is the group for which a lot of the work and recommendations that get made to the policy board are formulated. Next slide. We have a staff here. We're currently sitting at about 11 folks. We're actually in the process of hiring some more. But what our staff does is we provide the technical information and technical support to the decision makers, to the public, formulate the plans, do the research, do the analysis to kind of come up with ideas and concepts for everybody to think about and to consider as we design, and sort of plan for this transportation system in the region. We do a lot of the coordination between our agencies and our municipalities. We do a lot of work to kind of facilitate public input and feedback. We hire consultants to help us with some of the technical expertise. And just overall, we manage the planning process here. Slide. And then role of the public and stakeholders in the process. The public, and you can think of the public in a very wide lens when I'm talking about the public. It could be, a stakeholder representing a nonprofit group. It could be just a resident of a community. It can be someone who travels through the region because they're coming in for work and maybe don't live here. So the public can be a wide range of folks. And we try to get perspective from all of these different points of view on our transportation system to inform the planning process. A stakeholder, as defined here, is one who has an interest in something. So stakeholders can be all different kinds of people. And when we work with the public or stakeholders, like how do they engage with us? The policy board and the planning committee meetings are one way, or really 2 ways of doing that. You can listen in, you can always register to speak, you can observe the meetings. But these advisory committee meetings are really a great tool that gives folks more direct access to the process and allows you folks to provide that advisory function on topics that our staff may need more input on or are a particular concern in the region. And certainly equity is one that we are seeking a lot more input on to broaden how we approach things here at the MPO. And we provide, information, receive input, we consider that, all of that gets fed into the planning and the programming decision-making process. Next slide. So a couple of core products. Rima mentioned our Metropolitan Transportation Plan. You may also, for those who've been around for a while, may also have heard this referred to as our Regional Transportation Plan. But that's essentially what it is. It's a document that looks out 20+ years and thinks about what are our goals for transportation, what's our vision, where do we want to be, how do we want to invest our funds, and this plan sets the framework for how we do that. And we're currently developing this new plan called In Motion, and it's due to be adopted by our policy board in September of 2025. So this is a document that this group will certainly have an opportunity to weigh in on and be a participant in the process. So we're excited that the timing of all of these things is coming together all at once. The second core required product is called the Transportation Improvement Program. So coming back to that word programming. This is the document in which we actually assign federal transportation funds to capital projects. And it's a laundry list of every federally funded transportation project in our region, both on the highway side, so think roads, bridges, bike paths, sidewalks, as well as on the transit side. So all of CDTA's projects are included in here as well. This is also going to be updated and is due June of 2025. So you'll have another document that you folks will have an opportunity to provide feedback on. And then each year we develop what's called a Unified Planning Work Program. So again, there's that word program. This is where we assign our planning funds to planning activities. And what that UPWP really is sort of, I'll call it our staff and consultant strategic work plan. It basically explains what we're going to be studying, what things we're going to be assigning our time toward, and it's updated annually. So one of the other ways that this group will be able to inform the process is maybe there's something that you think is important for us to study related to equity or something that comes out of this advisory committee, and then it goes into that UPWP as a proposal that we can then assign some funding toward down the road, right? So this is all ways that this group can influence some of these core required products. Next slide. And a couple more, we have a new public participation plan, which was just adopted back in March. We plan on refreshing it maybe every couple of years, but equity is a central theme of this document, because one of the things we've learned over the years is when we look at what information we have, we're not getting samples or responses to surveys or input from populations that accurately represent the demographics of the region, right? So what we're trying to do now is find more ways and more tools to reach different population groups so that we get a clear cross-section of input from the region. And that's one of the hopes of this group, is building that network of folks that we can disseminate information to get input on as we just, plan for and fund the transportation system in the region. And the congestion management process, if you're not familiar with that term, congestion management, think this is the document you would go to if you want to know what strategies do we have in place to reduce traffic. That's the simplest way to put it. We just updated this document back in December. It's going to be a component of our long range plan. It's not the only component. So I don't want you to think that we're going to be putting all our eggs into addressing traffic. There are so many other issues related to transportation that need to be balanced with that document. That's one of the ones that, as a transportation management area, that we have to do under law. But I don't want you to think that that's the overarching guiding document for how we approach things here. But it's one that we'll be considering in the update of our long-range plan. The other thing the federal government does, which can be a little challenging at times, is in order to allow Congress to compare states with how the federal money is being invested, they came up with this performance-based planning and programming approach. These performance measures focus on things like how many fatalities are in your area or serious injuries. It may talk about, the level of traffic, travel time issues, reliability of the transportation system. All of these performance measures are things that we have to consider in the planning process, that we do want to make progress on. But again, they're not things that are going to be the end all be all of everything that we do here at the NPO. Those are really specific to certain topics that are of national significance to Congress. Next slide. So that is a very brief NPO 101. We'll stop here and see if anyone has any questions.
Do you guys consider environmental justice, pollution, things like that And where would that fall in probably in every factor?
Correct, yep, and we're actually gonna talk about that when Rima gets into her material.
I didn't have the EJ areas as a topic of conversation, but
Okay.
we can get into it.
Yeah, but for sure, you know, environmental justice, we have a whole environmental justice document that, I believe, I don't know if it was shared already with this group or not, but
No, it wasn't.
yeah, so we can share those documents with you, some of that background information, in terms of what sort of, census areas, for lack of a better way to say it, we've identified. One of the things we've struggled with a little bit is there's so many ways to define an equity area now or a disadvantaged community, and there's so many definitions of the components of what those areas include. We feel like in some ways it's gotten more confusing than ever. So oftentimes when, and we'll get into it maybe at a future meeting, we'll certainly share our environmental justice document with you. But to your point, to answer your question directly, yes, it's included in everything. It's included in how we evaluate our projects. It's included in how we even evaluate our plans. It's included in even into the level of when a community proposes an idea to plan something, we look at, is this in an EJ area or not? So there's a lot there and there's a lot to unpack coming forward.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, I
Other
think-
questions? Oh, go ahead.
Well, just to elaborate on that a little bit, like there's, you know, trying to put this agenda together, there's a lot of areas in our work that equity and inclusion efforts have been touching. And there's just a lot of sort of moving parts and a lot of different components to it. So it was real just sort of a question of like, what is it that we like tackle in this meeting and what are we leaving for later? And that was something that, well, we can get into at a later time, but yeah, we can definitely share that document with you and sort of dig into that later, because there's definitely there's a lot to talk about.
I just had a quick thought based on what you were saying about strategies to address some of these definitions and concepts of hard to reach communities. Have you considered the role of, say, various neighborhood associations or ward districts, or just whatever is specific to how communities of interest are terminology, how they're developed, right? Because however, a community member identifies with their community. Okay, I'm from this ward, I'm from that community, you know, just kind of having an understanding of how communities are laid out, how individuals relate to their communities, and then from that basis, see where their level of stakeholdership sits. Okay, if one community has a prominent neighborhood association, then they would sort of do the bulk of the work for you in terms of having that direct conversation with members of their community, if that sort of makes sense.
No, you make perfect sense, and thank you for that. Yeah, you know, I think, you know, we have tried over the years to keep on top of, you know, there's 77 individual communities in addition to the 4 counties that overlay all of that we have to kind of keep an awareness of. Some of the larger cities like Albany, for example, you know, we know who the ward leaders are.
Sure.
And we know there's a CANA, we know there's certain neighborhood associations, but we might not know because the people changed who the leader is of each of those groups, for, you know, the neighborhood association level. You know, things change, dynamics change. So one of the things we're hoping this group can help us do, as well as all of our advisory committees, is to help keep that data more current. You know, maybe you folks have connections with certain people in the community that, hey, I know so-and-so is super active with the Delaware Avenue Neighborhood Association in Albany. And you should have this person like on your contact list, right? So we'll be looking for that kind of information because we do need to rebuild a little bit our contact lists. And like I said, in some communities, we just had a little easier time to manage that than in others. But we're always looking for really finding those active and engaged folks that can do exactly what you're talking about, serve that role.
It's challenging to know all of those things about everywhere. You know, it's like I know what's going on in my own neighborhood, but I don't know what's going on in your neighborhood because I don't live there. So that's, yeah, like that's one of the real advantages and one of the real, one of the reasons why having advisory committees is a real asset is to sort of like span that network of those personal contacts, those personal resources, and those personal connections.
Thank you. Questions on mine?
There aren't any questions in the chat. If anybody has any questions online, please feel free to put your hand up, your virtual hand up, or put a question in the chat because I am monitoring it. You can always zero back to questions too if you put it in later.
Okay, well, we'll go on to our next agenda item, which is to kind of discuss how this group is going to function as an advisory committee. So recently, our organization established organization-wide policies for advisory committees. So what are the advisory committees? Well, first of all, these are going to be ongoing forums to discuss topics of mutual interest. They're going to, again, serve that advisory role to us as staff. And I think for all of you, they're really intended to provide these networking opportunities to have learn from each other about different practices throughout the region. As you heard in the introductions, we have a cross section of folks here in the region, so you might learn of something that's going on in Troy that you can apply in Albany, on all throughout the region. And they're really open to everyone. There's no formal membership process with these advisory committees because we want as much open engagement and dialogue as we can get. So there's no term limits, there's no, voting structure, there's none of that. They're really, really intended to be as open as we can make them. We have 5 advisory committees now here at the council. This is one of the 5. We also have advisory committees for active transportation, for freight, for human services transportation, and for the regional operations and safety topics. Human services transportation refers to the transportation options for seniors and those with disabilities. Yeah. Next slide. And, we tried to limit the discussion to what's on the published agenda. As you saw in the Rima's comments, we do have a public comment period, which you can actually register for advance, or you can take advantage of during the meeting. But, we're trying to use these meetings to allow you to provide us as much feedback and input and ideas as you can on, first of all, those federally required planning products that I mentioned earlier. So our long-range plan, our TIP, planning documents, our planning studies. We also have a number of regional studies going on right now, as well as local studies. Carrie's going to present later in this meeting about our Capital Region Vision Zero Safety Action Plan, which I think will definitely be of interest to this group. So we'll be coming to this group periodically over the next year and a half or so to get input on that plan. We have what we call community planning or linkage program studies. These are really strategic plans that kind of marry land use and transportation in communities. It's where we talk about, if you're familiar with the term complete streets, it's where we talk about how we can redesign streets to accommodate for all the transportation modes, help make them safer for everyone. And we do a lot of different kinds of planning studies under our community planning linkage program efforts. Next slide. When it comes to the capital program or our transportation improvement program, you as members of this group will kind of help us identify how consistent proposed TIP projects are with our plans. Because that's an essential element to getting access to federal funding and I'll use some wild examples here just to illustrate. Let's say a city in the region wanted to do a reconfiguration of a street, adding some bike lanes and some sidewalks on a street, which right now is only designed for cars. And there was a plan that supports that. That's sort of the ideal world. The opposite of that would be a community proposes a brand new road that's never been studied, it doesn't have modes of transportation for all the different types of users, so no sidewalks, no bike lanes, no transit access. That would be the worst case scenario. So just to give you a sense of what we're talking about, that's what we're gonna be having you folks weigh in on when it comes to the TIP projects. We also have another number of plans and other types of transportation programs that our member agencies prepare. So planning and environmental linkage studies, if you're familiar with the Reimagine 787 effort, that's one of the studies that we may come to you at the request of the state DOT in this case for input on. We have other studies like that going on in the region. We also have statewide plans from particularly New York State Department of Transportation, like the Strategic Highway Safety Plan. There's a statewide transportation master plan in development, so you may have an opportunity to weigh in on those. And then again, some of these regional and local community planning studies. CDTA is doing a update of their transit system and doing a transit development plan. So that may be another one that may come to this group at some point. So there's a lot coming. And it may come at different times and different points over your involvement with us. But we're gonna try to bring as many of these documents to your attention at different points in their development, not right at the end when it's all said and done, but at the beginning where you can have an influence on the process and comment and weigh in and help bring. And we always have another, because there's always things that come up at the 11th hour that we didn't think about and may require this group's involvement. So just to talk about what you guys as participants may do, you know, again, you can identify ideas and bring them to our attention that of plans or projects that may actually be harmful to a community. So, you know, using that exaggerated example of building a new highway through a neighborhood, right? It's not what we want, but you never know, something wild could end up on our list of proposals, and we hope that doesn't happen. But that's where you would say, hey, look, that's not really consistent with what we want to do here. Or maybe there's a planning process going on and we're not hitting all the right segments of the population that lives in the area. Maybe we're missing a non-English speaking population or a senior population or youth or whatever it might be. So how do we make sure that we do a better job in making sure we are engaging with those groups? And you folks, you know, we'll ask you from time to time, particularly if you represent an organization or a nonprofit or work in a community, to help us again with that networking and outreach, right? We often develop little media toolkits like social media posts and flyers and information that we say to you, hey, we're trying to collect information for our survey. Can you help us spread the word for the groups you represent? Do you have a local newsletter? Are there meetings we can go to help spread the word? And that's where that kind of two-way street happens. You guys bring stuff to us, but then we can go to you as well. And then, you know, when you're working in your field or you've seen things even as a casual observer of transportation, you might say, hey, you know, I visited this place and they have this cool thing. Why don't we do this novel, right? So it's an opportunity for you folks to kind of weigh in and say, hey, you know, I've observed this other thing. Maybe that's something we can look into for our region. Because sometimes we learn a lot from other places and how they've accomplished things. Next slide. And this is just to address some challenges we've had in the past. This is not meant to be, you know, scary or prescriptive, but just so that everybody's on the same page of what you can't do as an advisory committee participant. You're not a decision-making authority, right? So everything here is advisory, making suggestions, providing feedback. You can't speak to the media representing yourself as a member of an advisory committee here, because again, these are subgroups of a larger entity. We've unfortunately in the past, and so I have to say this, you can't use our logo or our letterhead or other media without our consent. Not talking about those toolkits where we prepare materials and ask you, but we've had situations where folks have kind of borrowed our logo and portrayed things as ours, which are not accurate. And then when it comes to, a lot of times where things get tricky is when there is a construction project underway, or there's something really getting deep into design where they're really looking at street level. Maybe it's a DOT project, maybe it's an urban city project, maybe it's town of whoever type project, but when they're getting into the true design of a project and getting into that street level detail, like the curb ramp on this intersection and the type of signal that's being installed, these sorts of design details, those kinds of comments are gonna be kind of shifted to the sponsor's public participation process for that project, because we can't necessarily influence that design process through this advisory committee. So, a specific example, let's say hypothetically, DOT was going to do some work on Wolf Road right now, and they were here showing a concept of a design. At the concept level, it's okay to say, hey, have you thought about this and have you thought about that? But when they're at the point of doing sort of public hearings or doing, getting into the real design of the project, they will have their own public participation process. So, we'll encourage advisory committee members to go to that, much like, the 787 project, which is in capital right now, it's planning, but when we see the flyers and the notices for those kinds of projects, we'll try to make sure that folks are aware that those processes exist. Particularly in the communities and the areas of the region that might be of particular interest to you. And then, one final note is, our contact list is sort of proprietary. We've had situations where people have used our email list to solicit for petitions or used for lobbying elected officials, and we can't do that here. So just so you know, you can certainly email each other, that's okay, but in terms of these specific things, those are things you can't do as part of an advisory committee. Next slide. And so these meetings, they're open to everyone. As I said earlier, we have planning committee representatives listening in. Our staff is going to be leading them, assess the agendas. If you have agenda ideas, certainly email Rima and she'll be happy to consider them. We'll have that public comment agenda item. If there's something on the agenda that's come up, that's kind of sort of urgent or short notice, and you'd like to have the opportunity to speak to that issue, that's totally fine. If you can't make a meeting and you want to submit something in advance, like, hey, this is really important, I can't make this meeting, but can you make sure this gets mentioned? You can do that as well. We'll try our best to get the agendas posted and all the materials made available a week prior to the meeting. We're gonna have an update of our website, so you'll notice probably the next time this group meets, it'll be a different website, but we'll use that to kind of disseminate a lot of the information. And probably the biggest change for everybody who was as part of this group in the past is the fact that we're broadcasting these meetings live. We're recording them on our YouTube channel, and they're going to be available for viewing at any time. So, keep that in mind when, you're speaking and you're representing an entity or an organization that you are being recorded. But the idea of that is, there's a lot of folks who maybe work during the day or can't make a meeting and, on vacation, whatever it might be. And now they can go back and watch the recording and see what was discussed beyond what you can capture in the meeting notes. Because as you folks know, the meeting summary is nice, but sometimes some of the subtlety of the conversation gets lost. So the recording will allow you to get the full picture. Next slide. And then this is true for all of our advisory committees. We just have a small code of conduct, expect everybody to be fair, be respectful of everyone, and participate, but not to dominate. We want to make sure everybody has an opportunity to weigh in. And if we have a problem with someone, we will remove you from active participation in the advisory committee. I don't expect that to be a problem, but in terms of ground rules, just wanted to make sure that that was known to everybody. And next slide, I think that's really it. So if anybody has any questions about any of that, let me know. Should be pretty straightforward.
Okay. All right.
Thanks.
Moving along. Gonna get into a little bit of the Equity Advisory Committee purview, what we see as like more of the specifics of what we'd like to dig into with this specific advisory committee. But before we do that, I just wanted to talk a little bit about what we mean when we say the word equity. So equity is when resources and opportunities are distributed in a manner that responds to historic and ongoing disadvantages faced by marginalized groups. And I like visuals, so just using these visuals as an example. So we've got, you know, one little guy there with an apple just falling into his waiting arms, while the other little guy has got nothing. So that's inequality. They have unequal access to opportunities. And then in the next picture, the question of, you know, is this an equal situation? Well, they both have ladders of the same size and they both have sacks to put their apples in, but one guy has access to the apples, while the other guy doesn't. So is that truly equal? Is that equitable? So, you know, equity would be using customized tools that identify and address the inequality of the system. You know, the tree leans to the left and there's more apples on one side than the other. And so they're addressing that by providing these customized tools. You know, one ladder is higher than the other, but it still doesn't really address the fact that the apple tree is leaning and there's more apples on one side or the other. So, you know, to have a truly just system, an equitable system, you would sort of fix the crooked tree and get it to, you know, grow apples consistently all around. So that would be like the ultimate goal. But so equity is really that idea of, you know, just addressing the idea of opportunities and unequal opportunities and customizing access and tools to address those inequalities so that you provide what individuals need according to what they have access to. So community purview, sort of elaborating on what Sandy has been talking about. More specifically, so advising staff on ways to improve efforts within the Transportation Council policy, studies, programs, et cetera, that optimize inclusion in the public participation process and equitable distribution of its competitively programmed funds. So really drilling down, focusing, you know, in this near future on really those two components, like public participation and equitable distribution of competitively programmed funds. We're, you know, as she mentioned, like we're updating the InMotion, our the plan to 2050, our metropolitan transportation plan. We're going to be updating the transportation improvement program, our capital program. So that sort of speaks to that equitable distribution of programmed funds question, looking at, you know, how we're programming sort of our staff labor and consultant work through the Unified Planning Work Program. We recently updated our public participation plan, and we'll be digging into this more in the future. But it's really sort of built out the components of it, looking at how to make our public participation processes more inclusive, and setting more of a way to better track our progress in that realm, to see how we're doing in that. And then our community planning program, the program overall, regarding our public, how it sort of integrates and speaks to the public participation plan and the, I didn't mention here, but the limited English proficiency plan as well, and how those two components sort of play out within the community planning program, like the linkage program. So we'll be digging into these things in more detail in future meetings, but that's sort of, the high level view of it for now. And then advising staff on equity issues within the capital region communities as they relate to transportation. So going back again to what Sandy was, sort of alluding to of being the eyes on the ground within the communities that you work and live in and engage in. You're seeing things, equity related issues that pertain to transportation, making sure that we are, please bring those back to us, engage with us on those things that you're seeing. Be our eyes on the ground, so that we're sure to be aware of those things as well. And then advising staff on a new annual public participation evaluation report. That is something that is came out of the new update to our public participation plan. And we haven't actually created one yet because the first one will be for the 24-25 fiscal year. So that'll be something that we would love to engage with you guys on as well. So priorities for this fiscal year. We're continuing to flesh out an internal equity audit, assessing past efforts that will be used to inform the InMotion MTP and future tips. As Sandy mentioned, the InMotion plan to 2050, ensuring a strong equity related content and deploying the equity assessment tool that we developed for InMotion to maximize engagement of historically marginalized groups. And we'll get into this in subsequent meetings so we can get an idea of like what that tool is and how we're trying to use it and get some feedback and some insight from you guys on how it's working. Evaluate and propose ways to make room at the table for new people so that the Transportation Council boards, committees, and staff better reflect regional demographics, and research peer models and consider developing internal metrics or evaluate criteria to support diversifying vendors and consultants. So these are some of the components that are actually in our current UPWP, our current Unified Planning Work Program that pertain to our particular equity task. So that's really it in a nutshell. There's a lot in there that we're going to be unpacking in future meetings. But for now, do you have any questions about that stuff? Any questions?
Something I typically hear in meetings like this, but I haven't heard so far, is the word sustainability. Is that going to be unpacked in a future meeting?
Sustainability.
With regard to the transportation plan, all the plans that we're going to be working on. Okay, I figured, I just wanted to ask a question.
Yep, like from an environmental perspective.
Yes.
Okay.
We'll get into that in the InMotion conversation in just a moment.
Okay.
Any other questions? About like what we're asking or looking for from this committee?
I mean, we didn't want to overwhelm you all today because we have a lot of documents and a lot of information to share. We talked about the environmental justice report, but as we're moving along, if you hear something, us mention a document or something, some term that maybe you're not familiar with and you would like more information, again, just reach out to Rima and we can share that with you and maybe add that to a future agenda. Because we can share a lot, but you may not want, we want to make sure that this is useful for you. And we're not overwhelming everybody.
So it's 4 o'clock now, and I did allot an hour to this meeting. And we didn't get to.
I'd like to get through the in motion, please.
Okay,
You know, then you can decide where you want to go from there,
okay.
because it's time sensitive.
Yeah, absolutely. I did want to hear about, well, maybe we should get to, yeah, the participants' interests related to equity and transportation. I would like to hear about, you know, your particular interests. So if you would like, I would, you know, if you could shoot me an email or, if somebody, you know, in the remotely, you know, could, share some thoughts in the chat, that would be great. Maybe we can revisit that at the next meeting, but for now, yeah, let's skip over to in motion.
Okay, thanks, Rima. So, you know, I wanted to introduce the Metropolitan Transportation Plan today. We have some surveys that are out now that are going to close at the end of the month, but we'll be opening a new one in June. So we're reaching out to you folks again to help us spread the word about this. So next slide, please. So, you know, as we talked about earlier, In Motion is the new name for our to be developed regional transportation plan, or MTP. It's going to replace our existing plan, which is called New Visions 2050. And this is our overarching planning document for this organization, in which we developed a shared vision for what the future transportation system is going to look like, and it's developed collaboratively with the public, with the governmental agencies, and all sorts of interested parties. And looks at all of our investment options. And, you know, we've talked already about how, you know, we have an allocation of money, federal money towards transportation plans and programs and projects. And this document's going to provide that framework for how we approach all of that. Next slide. So where we're at in this process, we sort of completed the data collection step. We have a website, inmotionplan.org, that's live, that you're welcome to come in to take a look at. We're currently in this sort of phase 2, which is sort of just informing people that this plan is happening and that we're going to be coming back to you over this next year with all sorts of additional information for feedback. We're going to be moving into phase 3 in June, which is the Imagine phase. This is the phase where we develop our goals and our objectives and our vision for the region. So it's a critical point at which we wanted to engage with you folks. And give you kind of even a preview today of what direction we're heading in on some of these topics. And then later in the upcoming year and a half, we'll have a decision-making phase and then sort of a review and adopt phase. Next slide. So to date, we have, as part of phase 1, completed that congestion management plan. We have another document called the Coordinated Transportation Human Services Plan. Coordinated transit, public transit, transport. Can you
Coordinated
help me out with my words, huh?
Services Public Transit Plan for this region.
Hence why we refer to it as the coordinated plan. It's much simpler to say. That's the document that in essence does talk about STAR service, senior transportation, transportation for those with disabilities. So that's that sort of plan. We developed a regional trend story map, which is an interactive map. So traditionally, when you do these planning documents, you end up with like a 50-page existing conditions document that, let's face it, in today's world, you're probably not going to sit down and read. We've translated that into an interactive map that you can scroll through. There's snippets of information, bullet points of data, maps, graphics, all sorts of things that serve as a resource that you can scroll through at your leisure. That is complemented by the traditional report that provides all the detail that you would ever want to know about our existing conditions. You know, one of the things we wanted to hear from you folks about is what's missing. You know, what didn't we capture in that? So if you do have a chance to even scroll through the big picture topics and there's something obvious that you're saying, hey, you didn't even think about this, we'd love to hear what that is. We have a public involvement plan that we've developed for this whole planning process. And as I said, we're in phase 2 now. Project website is up. We're in the midst of gathering information through a survey, and we're developing draft goals for our policy board review. So next slide. So this is a summary of what our existing conditions effort found in terms of key trends in our region. We know that the population is growing, but it's growing slowly. We know housing and the affordability of housing for all is an increasing concern. We also know the region's aging, and aging rapidly. We also know that there's an increase in traffic crashes of all types, but certainly our most vulnerable users are a particular concern: pedestrians, bicyclists, etc. We have an inequality of opportunity. And that is a broad term set of words to define different ways we can think about that. Whether that's based on certain neighborhoods not getting access or having opportunity to access jobs. The inequities we're seeing with where certain types of jobs are located and where people live and how they can access those jobs, or school. So there's lots of ways that we're talking about the inequality of opportunity in our region. The region as a whole is old and we have aging infrastructure, right? So we have to think about that in the context of this plan. We have disconnected development patterns. The graphic that's sort of glowing on your screen shows the sprawl that we've had in the development of this region since 1945. A lot of that is driven by the interstate system. A lot of that's driven by housing policy. A lot of that's driven by other factors as well. So, you know, these are trends that we're continuing to see in this region. How can we use federal money to maybe, you know, impact some of the issues that result from that situation? And one of the ways we're doing that, because we're seeing this in demand around the region, is that everybody wants more transportation options. They want more safe places to walk and to bike. They want more transit. They want, you know, more options, even scooters, right? You know, there's lots of things that we can do. So what are those, what are those options? And the other trend that, you know, is a little bit of a legacy of COVID, but still is, you know, important for, there's probably no single policy that this organization could have developed that impacted the transportation system as much as the work from home that happened as a result of COVID-19. It created a tremendous shift in how people use our transportation system. We know, coming back to inequality of opportunity, wasn't equitable across all the different types of jobs, right? Certain essential workers still had to go work at the grocery store, work at the hospital, right? But we also know state employees, as an example, are increasingly working at home. And what does that do to the transportation system? How does that change the dynamics of what services are offered and where they're offered? So these are some of the key trends that we found in our initial review. Next slide. And these are some of the draft goals that we're currently working on. This is just snapshots for now, but safety as a goal, and certainly we want to eliminate fatalities and serious injuries on our system. We also want to make the system feel more secure for those that use them. So think about your transit rider who might not feel secure at a transit station in the middle of the night by themselves, right? Or the driver of that bus who maybe feel threatened when they're you know, taking certain routes or what have you. So how can we make those improvements? Some of that's going to get informed by the Vision Zero Safety Action Plan. We want to think about mobility and making sure travel is reliable and efficient in the region. Access, improving those options, those choices, making sure that the folks that need to get to the right places can get to the right places through a variety of options. Equity is going to be a central theme in our long range plan, you know, and how do we particularly address the inequities experienced by disadvantaged populations, including but certainly not limited to racial and ethnic minorities, low income people, people with disabilities. You know, so that's going to be a central goal of our long range plan. Next slide. Making the region more livable. You know, how do we use the investments we can make in transportation to support economic development or population growth or housing in areas that offer transportation options? You know, we talk about walkable communities. This is where that fits in. Sustainability, that's we're going to start seeing that where that fits in. And that also relates to climate. Where we want to focus on how we reduce the risk the region faces from climate change and improve our air quality, which ties in the public health side of things. And how do we reduce emissions from the transportation system? And then the final goal, as proposed, is making the system as resilient as we can. How do we prepare for and protect the system from these changing conditions in the future? Whether they be natural hazards or other conditions, and then, we want to make sure we responsibly manage everything for generations to come. So those are sort of our preliminary goals. Again, kind of talked about the advisory committee role of providing feedback on all that. Next slide. But what you can do, we have a toolkit, like I mentioned, and if you represent an organization that you can send a social media post out through or a newsletter. We're happy to do that and share those resources with you. The current survey that I'm showing on the screen right now actually closes May 31st. As I said, there'll be a second survey that will be launching sometime mid-late June. So you may see an email from us asking for some help in getting the word out about that survey. But if you'd like to at least help us spread the word about the current survey, we're happy to share this graphic with you. And you can have folks, do the old Survey Monkey, I believe, or Jotform. I can't remember which platform we're using, but do an electronic survey. And we're also happy to come to talk to community groups about the long range plan. So, if there are, we talked earlier about neighborhood association meetings or other community meetings. So if there's meetings or groups of folks that gather that would be interested in hearing more about the long range plan as we move along, we'd love to know who those are, who those groups are. And we can certainly set up a time to do that. I think that's it. That's it. There you go. Any questions about that? Sure.
Is the interactive map on that website in motion?
Yep. Yeah, you'll find a lot of interesting materials and resources there already. But like I said, I think the main thing we'd love to hear from you guys is what's missing. What did we overlook? What are we not thinking about that we should be thinking about? Because there's so many ways to look at the various issues related to transportation. And if there's a data resource that can even support that, that's even better. But we certainly want to know what is not being captured. All right, well, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, well, if we can put the regional safety plan on the agenda for the next meeting. Yeah, okay. I know we are over time, but if we could just take a minute to talk about when would be the best day and time for our future meetings, if there's a particular day of the week or future and a future time of day, particular time of day that would work best for people. That would be really helpful to know so that we could future meetings. Anybody have any thoughts on that? In person and remotely as well would be really helpful to hear. One person already said that earlier in the day would be good for them. Anybody else have feelings on the matter?
Tuesdays and Thursdays, I typically have more like late meetings. So I would say earlier in the day, if it's gonna be Tuesday or Thursday.
Okay. Today is Tuesday.
So at least for those of us who are here, Tuesday might be good.
Yeah.
So how many people didn't, you've got to find out how many people
Yeah,
weren't there.
didn't
that
show up,
didn't Show up. Maybe you might be better off sending an email out, asking it, saying. Poll, could we do a poll? That's too complicated.
Yeah.
It's hard.
Yeah, we'll do our best to, we know everybody has different schedules, and that's also why we're recording the meetings, because we have a contact list now of about 40 people interested in this group, which is fantastic. And I know we can't get 40 people together all at once, but we're hoping that the online tools will allow folks to stay engaged, and just kind of stay on top of what's going on with the group.
So any other thoughts about day of the week or time of day? People tend to not like to meet like that, 4 PM on a Friday.
Yeah, no.
I would second that, yeah.
Yeah, Mondays and Fridays are usually not the ideal days of the week for meetings.
Tuesdays and Thursdays. is
Tuesdays and
good.
Thursdays?
If it needs to be earlier either day, I'm still okay with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Earlier Tuesday, earlier on Tuesday.
Like
How early, like morning?
11 a.m. maybe.
11,
Yeah.
11 on a
10,
Tuesday?
11, yeah.
all right,
11.
okay. All right, I'll see about that.
That
See if we can schedule it. So I was targeting like a late August, early September, and then a November date. So maybe the 27th, August 27th. At 11. Would that work?
Did you want to do a poll for those, everybody who isn't able to answer your question of whether it works because they weren't able to be here? And
I could do that. Yeah,
Yeah, maybe just pitch a couple of dates.
pitch a couple of dates. Yeah,
There.
okay.
Now, are there between meetings, or is there like dialogue happening between meetings?
Not typically dialogue, typically, like occasionally there might be, we might put out messages, like if there's development on, like, some like public release of information, or like a draft or a release for in motion, or some other like press release that we want to make sure that the advisory committees know about. We'll put that out. And you guys will get like the meeting notes. There might be like other, things that we want to make sure that you guys are aware of. We'll send that out. But typically there isn't like dialogue per se.
But
but-
if there's something that you know
Yeah.
that you want them to know,
Yes.
let them know.
Yes, that's what I was just gonna say. Yeah, if there's anything, yeah, exactly. If there's anything that comes up and you're just like, oh, I want to make sure that Reba, it's on the staff radar, by all means, please, like, shoot it my way, so we're aware of it and we can work on it, or, get it on the agenda. And, that might trigger a dialogue.
Right.
With you specifically, but we try not to, sort of flood people's inboxes with email conversations back and forth, because, like she said, there's 40+ people on this email list. So it's not something that we sort of treat as a conversation. It's more like we come together, discuss things, and then we work furiously behind the scenes and then come back to discuss more of the work.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's it. It's just between now and August is like the key community engagement time during the summertime.
Yeah.
And so how do we, I know in service organizations, at least we're continuously doing engagement. So if we have some key things that, like the survey, making sure we can share the survey or invite you to events or opportunities to face the public a little bit more closer.
Yeah.
And vice versa.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, we
that
can
would be great.
definitely, certainly send any events or questions or, ideas on that to Rima, and we can schedule things.
And which organization are you with?
I'm with A Village and Bridge the Gap.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
So I do a lot of community engagement,
Mhm.
outreach, but also community advocacy. Work on a lot of special projects and, I just want to make sure we're connecting and
Yeah.
bridging those gaps.
Yeah,
That's
that's
great.
great.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, I think that was. Besides zero, vision zero, I think that was the thing I needed to cover, so, I can end the meeting now. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
everything. Looking forward to it. Do I have to stop the recording before I end the meeting?
No,
Really? Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, everybody online.